Some crimes mark milestones in their eras due to the audacity, improvisation, or gruesomeness of the perpetrators. The criminal we are going to examine today was a deeply disturbed man who took every opportunity life gave him to harm himself, those around him, and the lives he took, at a time when sunny California was one of the world's centers for research on the cultural influence of the masses. Even if our audience doesn't know much about the life of vintage Hollywood, they've probably heard the name Sharon Tate, that beautiful, young, and fresh actress, wife of director Roman Polanski. Sharon Tate was only 26 years old and 8.5 months pregnant at the time of her tragic death. That August 8, 1969, when 4 people broke into her house, a house where Charles Manson had lived as a guest at some point. The following night, Charles Manson ordered his followers to go to another address in downtown Los Angeles. This time, an upper-middle-class family named Leno and Rosemary, La Bianca. The murders of Sharon Tate and La Bianca, also known as the Manson family murders, deeply shook the way the United States saw itself. They turned ideas of safety and innocence upside down and marked the end of the counterculture of the 60s. The ritualistic nature of the murders set the stage for the rise of satanic panic, a phenomenon that never completely disappeared. The life of Charles Manson is a challenging mosaic that we are going to talk about today. It's a story built on evil, constructed over several layers of abuse that traumatized the life of a man who succumbed to the basic instincts of violence. Reynaldo Carrillo here from the New Encyclopedia. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Charles Manson was born into a broken home on November 12, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he was beaten and emotionally manipulated. A childhood in which his mother didn't want to spend time with him. And he was raised by a grandmother who was emotionally traumatized by the death of her daughters. It wasn't long into his childhood before he began to exhibit behaviors typical of a psychopathic personality disorder. During his youth, Manson got into a lot of trouble with the law, stealing and starting small fires. He was arrested and placed in several correctional institutions, where instead of being reformed, he received severe punishments. Soon after, he escaped from one of them and lived in homelessness, committing minor crimes to support himself, between Indiana, Nebraska, and Illinois. His criminal lifestyle leads him to rise in the underworld, where he meets other criminals and learns vehicle theft from them. On one of those adventures, he is arrested in 1951 and sent to a prison where he is diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. But on the recommendation of the psychiatrist on duty, he is transferred to a minimum security prison. There, among the inmates, he learns the art of manipulation. He is released before turning 21 and goes to live with his uncles. In January 1955, he marries a waitress named Rosalie Joan Willis, with whom he has a son he never raised. Because he was arrested driving a stolen vehicle in Los Angeles, California, for that crime, Charles Manson receives 5 years of probation. In September 1958, after 2 years in prison during which he divorces his wife. When he gets out shortly after, he was already back on the criminal path, this time as a pimp. Shortly after, he is arrested again in September 1959 for trying to cash a check with a forged signature. He is given a suspended 10-year sentence after one of the prostitutes who worked with him defended him in court. Later, he would take that woman and other women to New Mexico with the intention of prostituting them. But he is arrested again and is forced to serve the 10-year sentence that had been suspended in 1961. Manson is transferred to the Los Angeles County Jail and then to the McNeil Penitentiary in the state of Washington. The time there was decisive in the evolution of his personality. There he learns to play guitar and meets the leader of the gang, Alvin Karpis, also known as Creepy. He meets the Chicano actor Danny Trejo and becomes obsessed with being a famous musician. There he also studies Ron Hubbard's Scientology and his mind control methods in depth, thus becoming a master manipulator. In March of 1967, Manson is released, having spent more than half of his 32 years of life behind bars for committing federal crimes. They say he didn't want to leave prison since he was already used to it. The cult, which was called the Manson family, originated in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco at a time when sex, drugs, and rock and roll were the norm. After getting out of jail in 1967, Manson started dating the campus librarian at the University of Berkeley, Mary Bruner, whom he manipulated into letting him move into her house. And then also under the concept of free love from the hippie counterculture, the librarian allowed him to bring a second woman into her house. A second member of the family named Lynette Fromm, also known as Squeaky, a runaway teenager whom Charles Manson picked up from the streets. Charles Manson developed a very sharp ability in prison to attract young people with malleable personalities. Then he would move with those two girls to Los Angeles, and there they would start recruiting more members for their family. And little by little, with his strange seductive charisma, they would end up having up to 100 vulnerable and impressionable young people under his command. Then, with the skillful art of manipulation, he managed to get himself and his followers into an abandoned ranch. It was formerly used for filming low-budget Western movies, where everyone began to live like a big countercultural commune, full of extravagance, substances, and lascivious acts. In Hollywood, Manson began to work his connections in the music industry. Soon he was mingling with music producers and actors. Actor Al Lewis remembered Manson as a good guy who even asked him to take care of his children on several occasions. Universal producer Gary Stromberg gave Manson a recording session, only to find out that Manson was unprepared, unreliable, and had no talent. However, Manson's most valuable connection with Mucho was the one he made through two of the female members of his cult, while they were hitchhiking on the street. The contact he made with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, Manson, was especially successful in manipulating Dennis Wilson. Throughout 1968, Wilson allowed Manson and his family to live in his house on Sunset Boulevard. He even lent Manson hundreds of thousands of dollars to help him record an album, in exchange for the sexual gratification from Manson's followers. But Dennis Wilson's manager eventually evicted the Manson family from his house in August 1968. They ended up at Spahn Movie Ranch, a popular site for filming cowboy movies, where, once again, Manson exchanged the sexual favors of his followers to the ranch owner in return for free lodging and food. Wilson from the Beach Boys tried to promote Manson's music and even convinced the Beach Boys to record one of the songs composed by Manson. He also introduced Manson to Terry Melcher, the son of the famous actress Doris Day. Although Melcher, who was a record producer, postponed the question of whether he would sign Charles Manson, he remained friendly with the Manson family. During this time, Melcher also dated the promising Hollywood star Candice Bergen, who was renting a house at 1050 Cielo Drive. Both Wilson and Manson frequently visited Bergen and Melcher at that house. As a result of Melcher's delay in signing Manson to a record deal, Wilson from the Beach Boys became frustrated with how Charles Manson was treating him and his wealth, souring their relationship. When Manson's song called Cease to Exist was released as a Beach Boys single in December 1968, the title of his song was changed to Never Learn Not to Love. And Manson's blues influences were changed to the Beach Boys' familiar pop sound, in addition to Manson being denied songwriting credit. In response to this major snub, Manson allegedly threatened to kill his supposed friend Wilson from the Beach Boys. These threats, combined with his general lack of talent, his violent temper, his blatant racism, and his tendency to rant about an upcoming major race war in the United States, led Melcher to ultimately refuse to help Manson with his music career, according to Mike Love, a member of the Beach Boys. It was Melcher's mother, actress Doris Day, who became alarmed by the friendship that was developing between the volatile Manson and her son, and she convinced Melcher and Bergen to move out of the Cielo Drive house in January of 1969. In June, Melcher finally told Manson that he wouldn't sign him to a record contract. By the summer of 1969, it was clear that Manson's dreams of Hollywood stardom were over. Manson knew that Melcher and Bergen had moved out of the house at 1050 Cielo Drive. In fact, the house was now being rented by filmmaker Roman Polanski and his wife, the actress from Valley of the Dolls, Sharon Tate. But Manson seemed to have the house fixed in his mind as a microcosm of Hollywood itself and everything that had been denied to him. Then, in August of 1969, with his psychoparanoia increasing and his commune of drugs and sex, under apparent threat, he ordered a group of his followers to go to the address and kill everyone inside. But the before and after of this story are still full of mystery. According to some versions, Manson ordered his followers to commit the murders of Sharon Tate and LaBianca because he was trying to spark what he claimed would be the next race war between the government and black citizens, especially the Black Panthers, whom he deeply hated. Manson had nicknamed this movement Helter Skelter. He preached that the song from the Beatles' White Album, with the same name, which was actually written about an amusement park, was really about the coming war. Throughout the summer of 1969, Manson had been hinting to his followers that if African Americans in the United States did not start this war, the Manson family should help them. However, other versions claim that with the murder of Sharon Tate, Manson was actually trying to distract the law from other crimes. Before these famous murders in May of 1969, Manson shot a drug dealer without killing him after a dispute over a drug payment. 2 months later, Manson had urged several of his followers to steal money from a friend of his named Gary Hinman. After 2 days of holding Gary Hinman hostage, during which Manson cut off one of his ears, Manson's follower Bobby Beausoleil ended up killing Gary Hinman. The members of the Manson family tried to blame the Black Panthers for Hinman's death, writing "political piggy" and a Black Panther symbol in blood on the wall. But Beausoleil was arrested for the murder anyway and taken into custody on August 6th. With these events, Manson became very afraid that Beausoleil wouldn't withstand police interrogation and would implicate Manson in Hinman's murder, and even implicate him in the shooting that happened just a few days earlier with the drug dealer, only 2 days after Beausoleil was arrested. August 8, 1969. Manson ordered his right-hand man, Charles Tex Watson, to take 3 members of the Manson family to the address on Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski lived. Manson's goal with the Cielo Drive murders was allegedly for his followers to kill everyone in the house, and then make the murders look identical to the killing of Gary Hinman. In this way, to divert police suspicion from the captive Beausoleil, on August 8th and 9th, 1969, on Manson's orders, Tex Watson took Manson's followers, Patricia Krewinkle, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian, to the house on Cielo Drive, where all of them except Kasabian, who was horrified, proceeded to kill Sharon Tate and 4 guests, as well as the baby she was carrying in her belly. The guests were Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Washef Frykowski, and Stephen Perrin, an 18-year-old young man who happened to be leaving the property when the killers were entering. As Beausoleil had done after killing Hinman, Manson's followers wrote "pig" on the door with blood, in an attempt to link the murders to Hinman's killing and implicate the Black Panthers. Susan Atkins was partly responsible for the brutal murder of Sharon Tate, and she often boasted about how she ignored Sharon Tate's pleas for her life, whose blood she later used to write on the walls. For his part, Craig Winkles cheerfully boasted about having murdered Abigail Folger at the scene. The news the next day caused a major national stir. The following night, on August 10th, Charles Manson led these followers to a house owned by Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, who were wealthy but far from the Hollywood elite. Manson directed and directly participated in the search for the couple, but let his followers commit the violence. After killing the couple, the members of the Manson family once again wrote chilling phrases on the walls with blood, including "Helter Skelter." Kasabian, one of Manson's followers, managed to prevent more violence that they were planning for another residence elsewhere in the city. Those messages on the walls made both the Tate and LaBianca murders seem like part of some occult practice, the result of a great evil. That impression persists to this day, although different versions indicate that the murders were practically a false lead. A decoy, although certainly Manson's commune was involved in extravagant practices. It all seemed to have been a plot to make sure Beausoleil was released before he could implicate Manson for his crimes. To this day, the Tate and LaBianca family murders are always mentioned as being related, but at the time they happened, the Los Angeles police ignored the idea of a link between the two crimes, despite the identical blood-scrawled messages on the walls. Even though the police raided the place where the Manson family lived, at Spahn Ranch, shortly after the murders, it was on suspicion of a car theft. The family was quickly released and Manson moved to Barker Ranch in Death Valley. However, before leaving Spahn Ranch, Manson ordered another murder. The murder of Donald Shee on August 26th, a ranch hand whom Manson blamed for informing the police about the stolen cars. In October of 1969, many members of the family, including Manson, were arrested. Once again, not for the Tate or LaBianca murders, but for stealing a trailer. But at this point, the police who were investigating the LaBianca murders, they connected the dots between the two murders, and they linked them to the Hinman murder and Manson's involvement in it. On December 1st, the police issued arrest warrants for the 5 main participants in the Tate-LaBianca murders: Charles Manson, Watson, Atkins, Kruwinkel, and Van Houten. This was followed by a sensational and highly publicized trial in 1971, characterized by disruptive outbursts from Manson and his supporters inside the courtroom and protests from Manson's supporters outside of it, even with a bomb that exploded in the courthouse, which fortunately did not injure anyone. Finally, Charles Manson was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of Sharon Tate and the LaBianca family, later followed by 2 more convictions for the deaths of Gary Hinman and Shee, the ranch hand at Spahn Ranch. Manson, Watson, Atkins, Kruwinkel, and Van Houten were sentenced to death, although their death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment the following year with the abolition of the death penalty in the state of California. Manson routinely relied on the devotion of his female followers to gain power, either through their direct work on his behalf or by their willingness to exchange sexual favors with whomever Manson wanted for whatever Manson wanted for himself. And as a result, many of them are still serving sentences in prison. Atkins died in prison in 2009. Van Houten was recently denied parole. Patricia Krenwinkel is the longest-serving female inmate in California. For their part, Manson's male followers, Tex Watson and Bruce Davis, also remain in prison. Davis, age 76, was granted parole in 2019. But it's likely that his release was blocked by the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who, like all his predecessors, has blocked all release motions of all the members of the family. Manson was very knowledgeable about American culture and Hollywood, even though many refused to acknowledge it. Not for nothing, he climbed up in that world and gathered loyal followers in that environment. The lasting impression that Manson has left is that of a rogue element, a terribly flawed product of the hippie counterculture of San Francisco. But that impression is inaccurate, since there are those who believe that he is not a flawed product, but rather a precise one. From that Californian culture of the 60s, far from being a cultural outsider, Charles Manson regularly mingled with Hollywood royalty. He was not a typical hippie or misogynist, but a sociopathic conman. He manipulated vulnerable women who were trapped in the countercultural lifestyle, and then he used them to further manipulate his way into positions of power and influence. We hope you liked this video. Please subscribe, comment, follow us on Instagram, and leave a like. This is Ronaldo Carrillo speaking. presenting the new encyclopedia,